We're fearlessly talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker.
Season alive. Gillespie from the out of bounds to the freshman Queen who's driving, floats it. Oh! Maryland on the right side of a buzzer beater with life into the Sweet 16.
Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Know that the first few days of the NCAA Tournament may have been a little bit quiet, but Saturday and Sunday have delivered, and we got ourselves a jam-packed Sunday night. You just heard Derek Queen, Maryland, buzzer beater sends Maryland to the Sweet 16. And I'll tell you what, we got to recap what was otherwise just an insane weekend. Should mention, by the way, we're live here right before 11 p.m. Eastern time. There are still 2 games going on. Producer Matt will keep me updated on Michigan State, New Mexico, as well as Oregon, Arizona, but did not want to wait until midnight Eastern on Sunday to go live. So we got ourselves a jam-packed show, mostly a Sunday show today. We did reaction to Arkansas St. John's that is available on both the YouTube and podcast feeds if you missed it. But today we got a lot to talk about. We're going to open Florida barely surviving the UConn Huskies. Criticize Dan Hurley all you want. He had his team ready to play. We'll talk about the Florida perspective. We'll also talk about UConn. Disappointing season. Three-peat is not going to happen. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they need to do in the offseason to make sure that they don't have a season like this again. From there, we'll talk a little bit about the Kentucky Wildcats. How about Mark Pope? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. A lot of people did not think Kentucky was going to beat Illinois on Sunday. They get the victory. We'll talk about the SEC, which minutes before we came on air clinched a 7th Sweet 16 bid, a record-setting 7th Sweet 16 bid. And then we'll kind of whip around the rest of the weekend in college hoops, some of the games from Sunday, maybe a little bit on Saturday. John Calipari, BYU advances. And I do want to do one coaching thing because Shawn Miller has the Texas job, and I am just here to say, listen, there's a lot of great schools in the SEC. I'm not saying he's any better than Bruce Pearl or Rick Barnes or John Calipari or Mark Pope, but that dude is not going to be a pushover. Texas is officially going to be a problem in the SEC, so we'll talk a little bit about it. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. One, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. For those of you who have found us in March, we appreciate your support. We just surpassed 52,000 subscribers. If you are not subscribed, make sure to do so. You can just click that subscribe button. We're basically going live pretty much every single day this time of year. Also, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, we are available there as well. If you want to do your boy Torres a solid, leave a 5-star rating and review on that Apple or Spotify page. Also, before we get started, I do want to thank our friends, do want to thank our partners, do want to thank BetUS TV. Okay, so I've told you all about BetUS TV. They took us to the Final Four last year in Phoenix where UConn beat Purdue to win a national title. This year, they're taking us to San Antonio for the Final Four. We are so excited to be there on behalf of BetUS TV. And listen, bottom line is this is just that time of year. You need wall-to-wall sports content, NCAA tournament stuff, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL. BetUS TV has you covered with basically wall-to-wall coverage of pretty much every sport going. Spring training baseball into the season, NBA, NHL going into the postseason. By the way, the college basketball coverage with my buddy Corby as well as Jeff Nadeau. It's as good as anything in addition to what we do here on the Aaron Torres Pod. So for more information, check out betustv.com. Again, just streaming pretty much 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, getting you the best content available. betustv.com. We appreciate their support. We are going to be in San Antonio on behalf of betustv.com. Also, before we get started, you know who else's support we appreciate? SeatGeek and SeatGeek.com. Okay, so here's the bottom line. NCAA tournament is well underway. A lot of you are lucky enough to be following teams that are still in the NCAA tournament. And if you're a BYU fan going to Newark, if you're a Kentucky or Tennessee fan going to Indianapolis next week, you are going to need tickets, my friend. And the best place to get it is SeatGeek.com. It is, of course, the #1 ticketing app in all of America, in all of the world, the best place to get your tickets. People, I am telling you, it is SeatGeek and SeatGeek.com, the SeatGeek app. Again, truly appreciate everything that they're doing for us. 28 million downloads of the SeatGeek app, the #1 rated ticketing app with tickets to 70,000 events, including concerts, festivals, and yes, sporting events. Bottom line, the best part about SeatGeek is they're giving listeners of the Aaron Torres pod a very special deal this March. All you got to do, download the SeatGeek app, use promo code Torres. So you're going to that Kentucky-Tennessee game on Friday night in Indianapolis. You're going to BYU versus Alabama on Thursday in Newark. You're an Arkansas fan going to San Francisco. I thought my Huskies would be there with you. Download the SeatGeek app. Use promo code Torres at checkout to get $20 off your first purchase. Also worth noting, it's not just the NCAA tournament. You want to go to a hockey game, an NBA game, a concert, baseball, you name it. If they're selling tickets on SeatGeek, that promo code applies. We appreciate SeatGeek. They are our presenting ticketing sponsor of the Aaron Torres pod this March, and we cannot thank them enough for their support. With that said, it's Sunday. It's 11 p.m. Eastern time. 2 games still going on, but we couldn't wait until midnight Eastern. There is no more time to waste. So, people, let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day, listen, we could start pretty much anywhere. You know, Saturday, again, was incredible. If you missed it, we did immediate reaction to the Arkansas St. John's game. And there was a lot of other good stuff on Saturday, but I want to start with Sunday. And in my opinion, outside of the SEC's overall dominance, which we will get into in a minute, I think the story of the day was the Florida Gators facing the UConn Huskies in what was actually the first game of the day, a 12:10 Eastern time start. And it's funny, I'll be real. You know, listen, I think if you listen to this show, you know, I don't think I've been down on UConn. I just think I've been realistic about UConn. I think it's been an up and down season. It's been whatever. And it's so funny because we're doing this Aaron Torres pod survivor pool. Shout out to the 50 or so people that are still left. And I, was just trying to think about my picks going into Sunday. And I said, well, I feel really good about Duke, but I think that Florida probably is the safest bet on the board. I said, there's just no way UConn is beating them. Not enough talent, not enough size, not enough athleticism on the boards, this and that. Yeah, I'd say Torres was wrong, to say the least. Now, as you know by now, Florida gets the win 77-74, but this was one of the games of the tournament, and I got to give Dan Hurley credit. In a season that has been up and down, disappointing, he had his team ready to play. Thought they out-physicaled them, thought they out-toughed them. I said this in the first half, is that in my opinion, Dan Hurley, listen, over the years, he's kind of, the offense has evolved. Luke Murray, one of his lead assistants, has really kind of modernized that offense. But at Dan Hurley's heart, whatever you think of him, he is a defense, effort, energy, want to coach. And I just thought he went old school on Sunday. We're going to game plan the crap out of this. We're going to beat you up. We're going to be physical. We're going to be nasty. We don't have more talent than you, but we're not going to let you out-tough you. To the credit of the Florida Gators, they withstood it. And to the credit, they made the plays late. You could go through a million different plays late. UConn had plenty of chances. And Florida just made more plays. I think obviously the story from the Florida side of things, Walter Clayton is just a stud. I mean, he's an All-American. I think he's going to be a first-round NBA draft pick. This is a guy that began his career at Iona under Rick Pitino. He was the difference. He is the reason right now that Florida is going to the Sweet 16 because for 34, 35, 36 minutes, his team did not give him much help. And basically the last part of the game, he just basically made all the plays. How about this? Final 8 minutes of the game. He had 13 points in the final 8 minutes. There was the big play on the loose ball that Liam McNeely had in his hands that he could not hold on to. The ball eventually gets kicked back out to Walter Clayton. He hits a three. And in the end, Florida survives. Really quickly, the only thought on Florida, and then we will get to UConn because there is certainly a lot to discuss. From the Florida perspective, listen, you know what this game is kind of like to me? It's a little bit like the Houston-Gonzaga game on Saturday night, where Houston was another one. I just did not see the scenario where Houston was not winning that game, and Gonzaga has them with the back against the wall. They survive. And I think it's the same for Florida, is that, Florida really, since that loss to Georgia about 3-4 weeks ago, I don't think you can say they haven't been tested, but dominate Alabama on the road, beat Alabama in the SEC tournament. The Tennessee game in the SEC title game was close, but it wasn't whatever. There was never a moment where you're like, oh, Florida's getting run off the floor. Florida's going to lose this game. And so I actually think that for Florida, this was maybe the best case scenario, if you will, because they survive, but they get tested. And now it's just like, okay, we got to lock back in because we can be beaten. We might be the best team in the country, but we are not unbeatable. And they survive and they do what they need to do. They go now to San Francisco, where they will face Maryland, who of course had that buzzer beater. We played you the audio earlier. And oh, by the way, if UConn had gone to San Francisco, there was a thought that Torres might have flown up to see that game. However, and producer Matt, this is where you can clip off the UConn part of things. However, I do think the bigger story is UConn. So let's dive into UConn. The final score again, Florida wins 77-75. And I think there's a couple thoughts. One, the Dan Hurley positive. Two, Dan Hurley a little bit negative. And then three, with their season over, the three-peat is done. The talk of three-peat is done. And now it's time to start looking ahead to next year. So first of all, the first big takeaway from this game, listen, I know there's no moral victories. And I'm not going to sit here and say that a two-time defending champ should feel good about losing in the second round, because I know there's nobody in that locker room that is okay with losing in the second round. But the counter to that is this. Honestly, if you had asked me before the game, I thought Florida was going to win by, probably double digits. I think double digits. And so to me, the first takeaway is like, damn, Dan Hurley still got it, right? And I think sometimes because of everything that happens off the court, the things that he says, the things that he's caught on TV saying, he was part of 60 Minutes, they had the E60 special. I have no problem with him building his personal brand off the court, but the counter to that is that I think sometimes you forget, he's actually a really good coach. And I'll say this, obviously I've watched basically every game that he's coached at UConn. But beyond that, I think the last 12 NCAA tournament games, the last 13 NCAA tournament games, including the Friday opener, 13 straight wins. I think you could argue his best coaching job of the NCAA tournament at UConn was actually on Sunday against Florida. Again, Florida's bigger, more athletic, more skilled. Walter Clayton, in my opinion, right now is the best NBA prospect on the floor. Maybe someday Liam McNeely gets there, but Walter Clayton was a first-team All-American, okay? And so the fact that UConn, again, there's no moral victories, but the fact that UConn was really in position to win that game, a couple offensive rebounds don't go there, or defensive rebounds for UConn, they become offensive rebounds for Florida. They don't go their way. It speaks to the fact that they were right there with a chance and they couldn't quite hold on. So one, I think this was maybe Dan Hurley's best coaching job in the NCAA tournament at UConn, which is crazy because you're coming off back-to-back national titles plus an opening round win. But obviously you lose. And I'll say this about Dan Hurley, is I know he gets a bad rap. And yes, by the way, I saw him coming off the floor complaining about the officials. I didn't love it. I don't know if Dan Hurley will see this. I don't know if anybody at UConn will see this. UConn didn't lose because of the officials. UConn lost because they couldn't get rebounds when they needed them, and Florida is really good. But what I'll also say is, for anybody, if you want to complain about how he acts on the sideline, that's you. Doesn't bother me. You're allowed to do it. You want to whatever. You want to complain about how he treats refs, okay, whatever. Refs get paid very well. Deal with it, whatever. But one thing I've said all season, when he goes to the podium, he's respectful of the opponent. He's actually generally respectful of the refs in the postgame podium. But the other thing that stands out is how much he loves his players and how much his players love him. And that's why whenever anybody wants me to crush Dan Hurley, what I keep saying is look, bottom line for me is that if his players love him and if he loves his players and treats them well behind the scenes, who am I to say what should or should not be happening? And so I bring it up because if you needed any indication of how much these players mean to him, Here is a couple words that he said after the game. My buddy Mark Zanetto, who hosts Locked On UConn, asked the question about three seniors, Hassan Diarra, Samson Johnson, both out of eligibility. Alex Caravan just finished his fourth year. We're kind of assuming that he goes pro. I don't think anything is official yet, but Dan Hurley is asked about those guys. Here's what he had to say.
They change your life. I mean, men like that change your life. I mean, I was a coach. I don't know necessarily I was on the hot seat going into 23. You got to ask Dave Benedict. But until these men, until Alex Caravan put on the uniform, and Alex and Samson, the players change your life when you have such special people.
So that was an emotional Dan Hurley talking about UConn's loss and talking about the seniors and the impact that they had. By the way, for people who are not split screening us, Michigan State has just beaten New Mexico to advance to the Sweet 16. One spot left. We'll wait for a final score in Arizona, Oregon. But listen, Dan Hurley showing the emotions. But let's also say this, is that it is now the offseason at UConn. And listen, I can't sit here and say this is the most important offseason at UConn for Dan Hurley. Year one was pretty important when they were coming off back-to-back losing seasons. He had an offseason where they were going into the Big East. And by the way, he had an offseason, like he said, after back-to-back tournament losses for him, in which, again, he said, I don't know if I was on the hot seat. You have to ask my AD, Dave Benedict. But I think there was some real pressure on him going into that 2022-2023 season. So I can't say this is the biggest offseason ever. But what I will tell you is, I think for the first time last offseason, things did not really go as planned at UConn. I think they missed on a few one portal guy specifically. I hate to say it. Maybe the development didn't go along as much as they expected, and they have to have some relatively wholesale changes going into next year. First off, in terms of who they're losing, we talked about it. Samson Johnson, Hassan Diarra, two seniors, part of these national championship teams. UConn fans love him. UConn fans are going to miss him. If you listen to this show, we had Hassan Diarra on basically every week last year. I love Hassan. He's a warrior, playing basically on one knee this year. He had major knee issues all season, played through it. Those two are gone. Alex Caravan, as I said, we will wait to see what ends up happening with him. And Liam McNeely, listen, disappointing end to his career. I know he finished with 17, 18 points, but he really struggled in those two NCAA tournament games. Most of his points came late, unfortunately, when it wasn't enough. But he's projected to go pro. And so now you have an offseason where you were the two-time defending champion. You dominated the NCAA tournament. Never forget, this is a program that not only won back-to-back national titles, they won back-to-back national titles, winning every single game by double figures, okay? And so I thought the Florida game was in some ways a metaphor for this season. Is at times you showed that killer instinct that has made UConn. You beat Marquette twice in the regular season. You beat Creighton at Creighton. You beat Gonzaga, Baylor, Texas in the out-of-conference. But then you had these weird games. You're trailing DePaul at halftime. You need to overtime to beat Butler, and it just never got going. And so for me, I'll just be curious what this team decides to do. We talked about the players that are definitely leaving. I think there's probably a couple more that are on the way out as well. Aiden Mahaney, I mentioned transfer, just never really feels like he fit. Nobody knows for sure, but I have like 5 people close enough to the situation that are like, yeah, he's not going to be back. So I would assume he goes. Probably just not the right level for him at UConn, although he did play pretty well down the stretch. Ahmad Noel, a freshman coming off the bench, I think the expectation is that he probably transfers. And then we'll see from there if there's another one. There's 3 guys that are in the sophomore class. 2 of them didn't really play this year. Jaden Ross, Yusuf Singare. I would assume one of the 2, if not both, end up leaving. And then Jalen Stewart, I think, becomes the X factor in does he come back? Because he's the one player that I think if he comes back, he could really make that leap into like all Big East kind of guy. He's shown flashes his first 2 years, but he's got to take the next step. The good news is, I'll say this for UConn fans. I was talking to somebody at UConn. I don't think they're as far off as you think. Let's assume Jalen Stewart comes back. Remember, you have a 4-man recruiting class coming in, 3 McDonald's All-Americans. Now, I don't think, Braylon Mullins is probably the headlining name, committed to UConn over Indiana and North Carolina. I don't think any of them are like, forget Cooper. Like I think they're going to be good freshmen. Braylon Mullins is probably the closest to being a very, very, very good freshman for them. But the four freshmen come in with Furphy, who's the overseas kid, 3 McDonald's All-Americans, and I think you got to get something out of some of those guys. But I do think the pieces are sort of there otherwise. Torres Reed, transfer from Michigan last year, was phenomenal down the stretch. I think he has all Big East potential. He was really good in the last couple games of the season, dominated at Providence late in the year, had a great game against Oklahoma in the opening round in the NCAA tournament. And so you have him coming back. Solo Ball made a big leap this year. Doesn't feel like he's quite NBA ready. I think he's coming back. And if you add Jalen Stewart with the freshmen, I think you have a team that is actually pretty good going into 2024, 2025, 2026, when you factor in the freshmen. Now, with UConn, you're still going to have to hit the portal. I think the one big thing that UConn is going to need, they need to find a playmaking guard. Listen, this year, again, we love Hassan Diarra, but probably more of a sixth man energy guy. He was the Big East sixth man of the year a year ago. I think it was tough to put a 35-minute workload on his plate, and Aiden Mahaney just wasn't ready. So I don't know who that guy is. I think the good news is for UConn, portal opens on Monday, and you're going to get a head start on and I still think you're going to have the pick of the litter because you are still UConn. You put guys in the league. But I think the one thing that was obvious, and I said this back in Maui, I was like, I just don't know that you have that guard that can make plays off the dribble, get to the rim, finish at the rim, whatever. And that just stymies the rest of the offense. Doesn't matter how much shooting you have. Doesn't matter how good your big guys are. If you don't have that guy that can make plays with the ball in his hands, it doesn't matter, right? And so I'll be curious what UConn does, because keep in mind this is that, like, when Tristan Newton was in the portal 3 years ago, he was a relatively respected player but he wasn't like a guy that everybody was saying, if this guy goes in the portal, you have to get. And so for UConn, to me, that's the big thing. You have to get a big guard, a playmaking guard, a tough guard. I just don't think you had enough of that this season. I think Braylon Mullins, the incoming freshman, is going to provide plenty of scoring. Solo Ball will as well. Jalen Stewart, I think, can make a leap. And Torres Reed, I believe, will make the next step as well. So that's the offseason analysis for UConn. They lose to Florida. Again, I thought Dan Hurley did one of his better coaching jobs, but it does not matter. They lose. First NCAA tournament loss since, how about this, 2022 against Chris Jans and New Mexico State. That was the last time UConn had lost prior to Sunday, but they lose. Florida advances, and now UConn has some work to do this offseason. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. When we do, we're going to talk about the other big games of Sunday, starting with a little one that tipped off in Milwaukee about 6 Eastern time. Kentucky Wildcats. I think a lot of people thought they were on upset alert against Illinois. Think again. We're going to talk Kentucky, the SEC's dominance, and much more from a busy Sunday of college hoops. All right, we're going to get back to the show in a minute, but before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. More Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So Going to go ahead and get to some of the other games from Sunday in a minute, but shout out to Chuck. Chuck, you kept your receipts, buddy, and I appreciate it. I thought about this on Saturday. He says, Aaron, maybe picking the Hogs in the Final Four wasn't a bad pick after all. For people who remember, my preseason Final Four did include the Arkansas Razorbacks. I took a lot of heat for that in January when they were 0-5 in league play, but Arkansas gets the win. And maybe we talk a little bit of Arkansas after we get through some of the Saturday stuff. We did a Arkansas reaction last night, but man, oh man, what a weekend for Arkansas. What a weekend for the SEC as well, by the way. We're going to get to that in a minute. Before we do, though, let's switch gears. Let's get to some of the other results on Sunday. And I actually want to talk about a game that to me, I thought it was really interesting, but I think the narrative is as interesting as anything else. Kentucky versus Illinois, okay? So we talked on Friday night's live show. Kentucky coming into the NCAA tournament. You know, listen, I can only go based on what I see on social media, the people that I know, the people that cover the team, the people that I talk to, fans that I know. But it felt like there was definitely a little bit of tension with Kentucky. We all know the history. You lose in 2022 to a 15 seed. You lose in 2023 in the second round of the tournament after beating a Providence team that had basically quit on Ed Cooley because Ed Cooley had taken the Georgetown job quietly behind the scenes. And then, of course, last year you lose to Oakland, coaching change happens, etc. Well, you survive game one, and survive's the wrong word. You dominate. You dominated Troy. You took care of business, whatever. But I bring it up because going into Sunday, there was a lot of talk from a lot of people of, well, okay, you get your win, you get that monkey off your back, but, you know, Kentucky's banged up, and Illinois' got dudes, and Yakashonis is a lottery pick, and what about Trey White, and what about Kylan Boswell? Yeah, turns out it does not matter, as Kentucky, really the start to finish victory. I see people in the comments saying, oh, they only won by 9. They were in control from beginning to end. They get the victory 84-75. And let me say this. I know, again, nobody's throwing a pity party for Kentucky because of all the injuries they've dealt with. But I think when you factor in what Mark Pope inherited, which is 0 players in the middle of April, also what has happened during the season, all these injuries, we're going to talk about him in a second, and what he has done to get the team to this point, he absolutely 100% deserves credit. And yes, by the way, I don't think it's ironic or, forgotten that Mark Pope is in the Sweet 16. His former school, BYU, is in the Sweet 16. And of course, Arkansas is as well. But it just shows you, one, I think that coaching change was the right move for everybody involved. But two, I'll also say this. It doesn't take 5 years anymore. It doesn't take 2 years. If you have the right coach and you have the right resources behind you, you can make moves right away. Mark Pope, the latest first-year head coach to make the Sweet 16. By the way, also worth noting that Dusty May, first year at Michigan as well. I think that's kind of an interesting note. 4 first-year coaches in the Sweet 16. In the portal era, you don't need time. You need the right coach. You need the right guy. You need the right NIL resources, and you can make it happen. But let's get to Kentucky. And I think the thing that stands out to me about Kentucky in this win is the following. It was really, like I said, a start-to-finish win, and something really struck me as I was watching that game. Whatever you think of Mark Pope, oh, he hadn't won a tournament game coming in. First of all, I never cared about that. He was in the WCC and the WAC for most of his career, 1 year in the Big 12. But when I look at Mark Pope, what stands out to me, and I was thinking about this watching the Illinois game, I can't say I can't ever remember all season long. But really, you go through this season, outside of maybe the Ohio State game, maybe the Ole Miss game, what has been so impressive about Mark Pope, his team always comes out ready to go, always comes out focused, always comes out prepared. And that was the case in this game. Like I said, you're in Milwaukee. The crowd is absolutely pro-Illinois. Illinois is as healthy as they've ever been. You're banged up as you've been basically all season long. And you come out, you're up like 10-2, something like that. I know it was 20-13 at some points. And 20-13 at one point, you're up by 7 at the half. And again, I'm not saying that Illinois didn't make runs, but there was never a moment where you're like, oh, Kentucky's going to lose this game, or, oh, it's getting too close for comfort. It was kind of the opposite. It was like Kentucky got up on a lead and they just kind of hit cruise control for the final 30 minutes. And when I say cruise control, I don't mean they let their foot off the gas. I mean, they kind of just maintained a dominant level. It was just a really impressive effort. And so when I look at kind of the totality of this Kentucky season, I think a couple things stand out. One, I think what I said is true. Mark Pope, one of the most impressive things is the preparedness, I think I said that word right, of his teams. No, every single game hasn't been perfect. The Ohio State game before Christmas is the one that comes to mind. But for the most part, every single game that matters, his team has absolutely been ready to play and execute it out of the gate. Now, you could argue there's other, but even the Arkansas game, it's not that Kentucky didn't execute. It's just that Arkansas executed as well. So, same with Florida when they came to Rupp, same with Alabama when they came to Rupp. So his teams were always ready to go, always prepared. And then listen, I know it's beating a dead horse, and I know that everybody deals with injuries, but what they have done this season with the injuries that they've had and the manner in which they've had them, it's absolutely unbelievable as far as I'm concerned. Now, coming into the season, I thought they'd be better than people expected, but the counter to that is, and Pope said this in his presser going into the NCAA tournament, there's something like bottom 10 in the country out of like 360 teams, the bottom 10 in terms of the minutes that were actually, like basically if you take the expected minutes of the players that they expected to play, and then the amount of minutes that were actually played, they were bottom 10 in the country in that stat. And I'm sorry that I don't have the name of the stat off the top of my head, but the bottom line is this team's been dealing with injuries basically nonstop since before Christmas, okay? Kirk Risa goes down with the foot injury at Gonzaga. That was like the first week of December. Kirk Risa, foot injury, out for, we didn't know it at the time, but basically out for the year. Then Andrew Carr hurts his back. He's in and out of the lineup. You lose to Georgia. He comes back. Then Lamont Butler gets hurt. Then Jackson Robinson gets hurt. Then I think Lamont came back and got hurt again. Then they both came back for the Oklahoma game. Jackson Robinson goes out, and he's not this, he's out for the year. Lamont Butler I love Lamont. He was phenomenal, by the way, on Sunday, but he has not been the same since middle of SEC play, beginning of SEC play. I mean, he's just been banged up. He's been beat up. It's been one injury after another with that kid. And that to me is the impressive thing about Kentucky. And so for them to do all of this, and then for them to get to the Sweet 16, considering all of it, it's unbelievable, right? Because I think when you go through a coaching change, and by the way, all of these coaches have talked about it. So it's not just Mark Pope. Calipari's talked about it at Arkansas. But the bottom line is it takes time to build a culture, to put together a roster, to build a culture, to do whatever, to do this, to do that. And so if you go back to the day that Mark Pope was hired, early to middle of April of 2024, and I think if you had asked most Kentucky fans, oh, by the way, you don't have a roster, none of your players are coming back, Mark Pope had never won a tournament game, he didn't have a staff. If you said the minimum is the Sweet 16, I think you'd absolutely have taken it, especially given the NCAA tournament struggles of before, but then certainly when you realize everything that has happened this year, multiple injuries, multiple guys in and out of the lineup, multiple points. You're playing guys, Trent Noah, Colin Chandler, Travis Perry. I'm not saying they were supposed to redshirt, but they weren't supposed to be playing the way that they're playing now in the minutes that they were supposed to be playing. And you still find ways to win games. And oh, by the way, you've done it in this incredible first season that includes win over Duke, might be the number one team in the country. Win over Florida, might be the number one team in the country. That was when you were fully healthy. You sweep Tennessee. You, of course, beat Texas A&M, who was a top 15 team most of the year. You win at Mississippi State. You win on the buzzer at Oklahoma. I mean, just a ton of incredible wins. And I know I'm missing a few. You beat Gonzaga in Seattle. You go on and on down the list. It is unbelievable what this team has done, given everything. And so I just want to take a moment, give Mark Pope his flowers. I don't know what's going to happen from here, but even a guy that was high on Kentucky coming into the year, one, I didn't know they were going to beat Duke, and I didn't know Florida's going to be this good, and you beat them, and you, of course, you sweep Tennessee. But two, what he is doing, given the injuries, I think is especially incredible. So credit to Mark Pope, NCAA tournament, Sweet 16 in year one. And here's the crazy part. You're going to Indianapolis now. And I know Indianapolis is just as easy of a drive for Tennessee fans as it is for Kentucky fans. I know there's going to be a lot of Purdue fans there as well. But you don't mean to tell me BBN is going to take over Indy? By the way, Kentucky fans, if you are going to Indy, SeatGeek.com, use promo code Torres. You get $20 off your first purchase. And so make sure to take advantage of that. SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres for your first purchase. But you're going to, I just don't know how, considering the injuries, just how could it have worked out better? You're in the Sweet 16. One, that's a success. Second weekend for the first time since 2019. Oh, by the way, you're playing don't tell Vols fans, because I know we got some of them in the chat. You're playing a team that you've beaten twice, and it's not like you beat them in November when you were at full strength. You've beaten them with all kind of guys in and out of the lineup. You kind of seem to have them figured out. Not saying it's going to happen. We'll preview all the Thursday, Friday games probably on Tuesday. But man, oh man, oh man, what a first season for Mark Pope. My man deserves some flowers. And yes, you can follow all of our Kentucky coverage. Torres on UK on Twitter. Torres on UK on Twitter. All right, so Kentucky. I think, in my opinion, they are part of what is actually probably the biggest story in college basketball this weekend. So let's go ahead and talk about, in my opinion, by the way, a buddy just sent me a tweet. It said, best three-way trade ever. And it was just a Kentucky logo, Arkansas logo, BYU logo, but it speaks to the truth. But let's go ahead and switch gears. Let's go ahead and talk about what, in my opinion, is actually the biggest story of the weekend. It involves the team we just talked about, Kentucky, and it involves this. SEC, 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 SEC. The kids say it just means more, and apparently it does, because with Kentucky's win on Sunday, with Ole Miss's win on Sunday, Alabama gets a victory, Florida, and of course on Saturday, producer Matt's Auburn Tigers, Tennessee Volunteers, and Auburn Tigers, Tennessee Volunteers, and somebody else I'm forgetting. But we have 7, count them, 7 SEC teams in the Sweet 16. First time ever one conference has put 7 teams in the SEC. And Arkansas. I forgot Arkansas. How could I forget Arkansas? So Arkansas is the first one. Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Ole Miss, and now for Tennessee or whoever. You get the point. There's 7 SEC teams in. It's a record. For people who are watching this after the fact, it's 11:32 Eastern time, so forgive me, okay? But 7 SEC teams in the Sweet 16. That is a record. By the way, the second time the team that I skipped was Alabama. Producer Matt, the Auburn Tiger, says they're trash anyway. I don't think they are, and I don't think the SEC is trash. Again, people, listen, we've talked about this since November. The reality is that on paper, this was trending to be the best league in college basketball history. You could argue that they had the best out-of-conference ever for a conference in college basketball history. Now they have had the best first weekend in SEC in conference for any conference in tournament history. I think it's official. I think it's indebatable. I think the SEC, we are watching the best conference that has ever existed. And it's really funny because coming into the weekend, you saw so many people, this league is so overrated. How could they possibly get 14 teams? I will defend everybody in one way. I said it on Selection Sunday. I didn't think Texas should have been in. 15 losses, in my opinion, was too many. You know who else agrees with that? The Texas administration, because they literally fired their coach on Sunday. We'll get to Shawn Miller in a minute. But at the same time, even if Texas doesn't get in, you still have 13 teams. It is by far the best performance ever for a conference, even if you don't include Texas. And Texas, of course, is included. But beyond that, when everybody said that the SEC was overrated, first of all, the only teams that lost early in the tournament were basically 10 and 11. Oh, my God, Vandy lost as a 10 seed. What a shocker. Mississippi State lost in an 8-9 game. So don't tell me, because, when you lose a couple games early in the tournament, clearly everybody's overrated. But here was the thing that I kept going back to. And I think you guys and girls know. Do we talk a lot about the SEC? Yeah, because they're really good in football and basketball. But I will also say, when I think the SEC narrative is spinning out of control, I said it in football season, did not think Alabama belonged in the college football playoff. But this year in basketball, how could you argue, one, that it's not the best conference, but then two, that they got too many teams in the NCAA tournament? Because if you go back and look, first of all, go back and look at the teams that got in, okay? If you want to argue that they shouldn't have been in, first of all, my argument is who should have been in. North Carolina with one quad one win got in. Xavier picked up its second quad one win in the week of the Big East tournament. like who was supposed to be in that didn't get in? West Virginia, their coach was so mad he left for another job a day later. But beyond that, go back and look at these teams in the out of conference, because the out of conference has to matter. And so sometimes I believe these narratives are overblown. Oh, the SEC is not as good as everybody's making it out to be. They kind of stink. And it's like, but this year, go back and look at the out of conference. Forget what Auburn did, which beat everybody. Auburn beat Michigan State, UNC, Purdue. They beat Houston. They beat Memphis. I mean, Auburn destroyed everybody not named Duke. Alabama took care of Houston. Alabama took care of Illinois. I mean, the stat that I love about the SEC, one, the SEC had more wins over Houston than the actual Big 12 did. Houston went 19-1 against Big 12 teams. They went 0-2, I believe, against SEC teams, maybe 1-2, whatever. But so 2 wins against Houston. Alabama beat Illinois, beat Creighton, beat whoever. Auburn beat everybody. But even the teams on the bubble, Oklahoma, like, I know you look at the 6-12 record in conference play and say they don't belong in the SEC tournament, but they also were 13-0 in the out of conference. They beat Michigan, the Big Ten champs, in the Big Ten conference tournament champs. They beat Louisville. They beat Arizona. Like, Oklahoma was awesome in the out of conference. Arkansas had a win over Michigan in the out of conference, plus a bunch of great wins in the conference. And so if you're sitting there saying they didn't deserve to get in, it's like, oh, by the way, great call by producer Matt. The St. John's team that everybody, including me, loved, lost to Georgia in the out of conference. So, like, if Georgia's going to go in the out of conference and beat St. John's, like, how are we sitting here saying that these teams don't belong in? And again, who got left out that was more deserving than Oklahoma, than Georgia, than Arkansas, than Vandy? And now we get to the tournament, and the resume speaks for itself, right? First of all, beyond just the 7 teams, you know what kind of impresses me is just the manner in which these teams are advancing and the history that is being made, okay? So, like, you might not like Chris Beard, and if you don't, I totally understand it, and I'm not here to change your mind. What he was accused of, I know some people can't get out of their heads, but can we not deny that this guy is an unbelievable basketball coach? Ole Miss has been to 1 Sweet 16 in school history, 2001. They just went to the Sweet 16 today, okay? Second Sweet 16 in school history in year 2 for Chris Beard. So, like, are we not supposed to acknowledge that Ole Miss was the 8th best team in the SEC and is going to the Sweet 16? How about Arkansas? 9th best team in the SEC, beat the Big East regular season champs, Big East tournament champs in Big East country in what was essentially a road game. Arkansas, we talked about. We'll probably talk about them again in a minute. It's like, so listen, again, I am not one, if there's a narrative that's BS, I will call out the BS narrative. But are we not supposed to acknowledge out-of-conference wins? Are we not supposed to acknowledge that conference basically dominated everybody in the out-of-conference portion of the slate? And so, listen, there's other good conferences. Big 12's excellent. Houston's in the Sweet 16. BYU's in the Sweet 16. Arizona is coming down to the wire against Oregon. We'll keep you updated on that. So it's not as though, like, the Big 12 wasn't good. The Big 10, by the way, Michigan, Purdue, Maryland winning at the buzzer. Michigan, the Big 10, of course, has 3, maybe 4. Michigan State, Maryland, Michigan. Yeah, so the Big 10 has 4. The Big 12, I believe, right now has 2 and maybe 3, depending on what happens in the Arizona game. And so, like, or they have 3 too. So they'll either have 3 or 4 because they have Houston, Texas Tech, and BYU, maybe Arizona. So it's not to say that there aren't other great leagues, but this team was awesome all year. The out-of-conference has to count. And the thing, again, that stands out to me is the reality that, in my opinion, if you look at it, is that they just dominated the out-of-conference, and they did things in the out-of-conference that nobody's ever done, and now they're doing things in the tournament that these schools have never done. I mentioned Ole Miss had been to 1 Sweet 16 ever. Do it again in year 2 under Chris Beard. This stat blew me away. From 1991 until Nate Oates got to Alabama, they had been to the Sweet 16 one time. So one time in about a 25, 26, 27-year period. They've now gone 4 times in 5 years. We know what Bruce Pearl has done. By the way, Rick Barnes, oh, that guy never wins in March. Yeah, guess what? He's been to 4 Sweet 16s in the last 6 years. John Calipari, oh, he's left for dead. We thought that they, what's the quote we used? They put us in the coffin. They just forgot the nails. He's going to the Sweet 16. Mark Pope, he's never won a tournament game. First year at Kentucky in a program in the SEC, gets there as well. So listen, I could go on and on. I don't want to undersell, what other leagues have done, but I thought it was absolute nonsense to argue that the SEC was somehow overrated. Credit to those teams. 7 teams in the Sweet 16. We don't quite have every game set yet, but there are going to be some barn burners next weekend. And again, I think, you start to look ahead among many of them. Tennessee against Kentucky and Indianapolis. There's going to be some really good games involving SEC teams. And again, they're battle tested. Nobody wants that smoke. And so I'll be fascinated to see how they do next weekend. But it was a record-setting March, just like it was a record-setting November and December in out-of-conference play. By the way, SEC teams only went 500 in league play, which was a little bit disappointing, but that's another conversation for another day. All right, take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of the Saturday results, and then we do have to get to the one big coaching move of the weekend. Speaking of the SEC, Shawn Miller is going to Texas. You just got yourselves another monster SEC. Take a quick break, talk Saturday hoops. Be right back. What's up, everybody? It's AT, and listen, long day of podcasting. Sometimes don't always look the best. So look at this. It's a little bit not great, okay? Well, here is the great news. The great people at Filebox said, Torres, you're a professional. You just got 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. You need to look better. And so they sent me a couple awesome things. I want to pull them out for you right now. This is all from the winter collection, by the way. Spring collection is coming out. We got the vest, very, very, very nice. The sweater, very professional for when I go to professional events. We got these nice blue jeans. I think the question now everybody's asking is, Torres, how do you actually look when you put that stuff on? Let's find out. Well, what do you think? Sweater fits perfectly. Great for all occasions. When I go to games, when I go out to a dinner, warm weather, cool weather, it's perfect. Speaking of perfect, these jeans are phenomenal. Great for games, great for social events. Oh, by the way, a little bit stretchy if those New Year's resolutions aren't going on as planned. Really quickly, we got to try out. Let's try out the vest. It fits perfectly, not a surprise. So here's the deal. If you want to look as good as Torres, this is what I need you to do. I need you to go to Filebox.com. That's F-I-O-B-O-C. Filebox.com. And here's the best part. For listeners to the Aaron Torres pod, you get 20% off with code Torres20 at checkout. We also put a referral link in all of our YouTube videos. Thank you to Filebox. By the way, make sure you're following them on social media at F-I-O-B-O-C. Thank you to Filebox. You want to look as good as Torres, check them out. Again, promo code Torres20 for 20% off. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. It will be the final segment of the show, but we still got a lot to talk about. So good to be back. Before we get to the rest of the show, I do want to, as always, thank our friends, thank our partners. I want to thank Cauley Puffs and CauleyPuffs.com. Okay, so I've been telling you about Cauley Puffs since football season, but it is now officially March. You're sitting on the couch. Guess what? You're going to need some snacks because there's a pretty good chance that your team is in the Sweet 16. We got a lot of Kentucky fans, Arkansas fans, Tennessee fans, BYU fans that listen to this show. Maybe Arizona joins them. We'll keep you updated on that game. And as you sit on the couch watching your favorite team, guess what? You need a snack that is both healthy but delicious as well. My friends, you need Cauley Puffs. Okay, so I've told you all about Cauley Puffs. Family-owned company, not far from where I live. Joey, huge sports fan, Rams season ticket holder. He's in our Aaron Torres pod survivor pool. And he was sitting on the couch one day watching games. He said, you know what? I need a snack that's both healthy but delicious, something that I'm going to like, something that my kids are going to like, something that's not going to make me a fat slob. And that's where he came up with Cauley Puffs. Bake, not fry, avocado oil, no grease, healthy ingredients. But the best part is, people, these steaks, they taste delicious. So for more information, this is what I need you to do. I need you to go to CauleyPuffs.com. That's CauleyPuffs.com, CauleyPuffs.com. And also you can check them out on Amazon.com. So you're on Amazon. You already got a cart open. You got some weird, funky stuff in that cart. I don't want to know what it is, you little freak. But search Cauley Puffs. Throw some in there. Have them for a snack. Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4. Trust me, you'll like them. Thank you to Cauley Puffs for their support. CauleyPuffs.com, CauleyPuffs.com. All right, really quickly, I do want to go back and talk a little bit about some of the Saturday games. We don't have to spend a ton of time on them, But the one thing that I do want to talk, but one game I want to start, because I know some of you missed our Saturday reaction show to Arkansas versus St. John's. Well, let's go ahead and talk about that one, because to me, I think this might still be the best story of the NCAA tournament going into the Sweet 16. Now, listen, the SEC having 7 teams is incredible. I'm not trying to say that isn't incredible. But Arkansas, what has happened there, what has happened with John Calipari and the Razorbacks, it's as good of a story as we've seen in a long time. And it was capstoned on Saturday as Arkansas in Providence gets the win over St. John's. Final score 75-66. And yes, we did talk a little bit about it on Saturday in a recap. But for those of you who didn't listen, I just want to talk about it really quick. First of all, listen, I hate to say it, there were really 2 stories of the game. There's the Calipari angle, there's the Rick Pitino angle. There was also the refereeing angle. And we talked about it on Saturday. Refereeing in this game was abominable, okay? The good news is, if you're looking for a positive, it was terrible on both sides. Now, St. John's fans will tell you it was worse for them. Kadari Richmond, their second leading scorer, their biggest playmaker, he was, he fouled out in like 16 minutes of play, but Big Z fouls out in 10 minutes of play for Arkansas. And oh, by the way, Jonas Adu playing the entire game with 4 fouls. Nelly Davis had 4 fouls. Boogie Fland had 4 fouls. So the refereeing was terrible on both sides. But the story was Arkansas. The story was the resilience of this team, okay? You talk about a team that, in my opinion, what they did on Saturday, what they've done all season, is absolutely incredible, okay? We know about the 0-5 start, but we've talked about it. The fact that this team, the fact that they were 0-5, a couple things stand out. Now, listen, there's a glasses half full, glasses half empty element to this. The glasses half empty element, the glasses half full is, even when they were 0-5, we were saying, listen, it's not good. And yes, I'm the guy that said Calipari, maybe it's over for him. But at the same time, I said, look, you're in the SEC. You're going to have chances to pick up wins, but you still actually have to go out and do it. And so for Calipari to go out back half of the season, and I think the big thing for me is the fact that he was able to do it in the SEC in a first year at a new program where none of those guys had ties, right? And we've talked about it throughout the last couple of weeks, but, it would have been so easy for all those guys to just sit there and say, you know what, I'm DJ Wagner. I came from Kentucky. I'm Jonas Adu. I came from Tennessee. I'm Nelly Davis. I played in the Final Four. I got my NIL money, whatever. I have no affiliation with this school. Let me get to February, get to March, lose in the SEC tournament, pack my bags and get the heck out of here and get ready for the pros, get ready to do whatever the next thing is. And so for Calipari to keep that team locked in, to keep them motivated, to keep them ready to go, and I'll take it a step further, to get them to get better over the course of the season. That's the thing that's the most amazing thing to me, is that, one, basically every player on that roster is a better version of himself from this year from a year ago, or from earlier in the season, excuse me. DJ Wagner's a completely different player. Jonas Adu playing his best basketball. Trevin Brazil playing his best basketball. Billy Richmond, Carter Knox playing their best basketball. Boogie Fland coming back. I think Boogie Fland's actually been pretty good, hasn't tried to do too much. I think the only guy that Nelly Davis is playing his best basketball. So to me, it's you've kept those guys locked in. They're all playing their best basketball. And now you look ahead, they're going to the Sweet 16. And there's a couple things that stand out. First of all, we'll get to how they match up in a minute. But to me, I'm sorry, I think Calipari is the best story in this tournament. And listen, I know I got a lot of Kentucky fans in the chat. This isn't a knock Kentucky fans, because 99% of you are awesome. And oh, by the way, we talked about it earlier with Kentucky. It was the best thing that ever happened for Kentucky, and the best thing that ever happened for John Calipari for him to leave. But I won't change the fact that, this guy took so much heat, so much scorn. Every time he lost, everybody's piling on. And for him to keep the course, it's incredible. It's one of the best stories we've seen in a long time. And I think the cool part is how he has blocked out the noise. I thought it was really interesting. Matt Norlander from CBS did an unbelievable story on CBSSports.com where he talked to Ellen Calipari, which is John Calipari's wife, and then his daughter, I believe her name is Megan. I apologize. The one that they keep showing on TV. She's got her head in her hand. She's sweating it out. She's nervous. But I just bring it up because they talked about and they acknowledged, like, hey, we know like our issues relative to the world's issue. Like in other words, like, yes, my father, my husband is a Hall of Fame coach. And yes, life is pretty good. But it wasn't easy leaving the only home we've known for the last 15 years, the place that we thought we were going to retire. It isn't easy seeing the things that everybody is saying about your husband, about your father, online, on the internet, on TV, in the newspapers, and whatever. And we could sit there and say, one, it doesn't impact people, but two, just to ignore it. But the bottom line is it's impossible to ignore. You can't turn on the TV during college basketball season and people aren't talking about John Calipari. So for him to keep everything in line, it is just one of the coolest stories we've ever seen. The best part is, I think you kind of match up well with Texas Tech going into the weekend. Now, we're going to preview all of the big Thursday, Friday games, probably on Tuesday night. By the way, the portal opens on Monday. We're going to have a portal reaction show on Monday evening, so make sure and stay tuned for that. But I just bring it up because when I look at Calipari and I look at Arkansas against Texas Tech, I think it's a pretty good matchup. Texas Tech is tough, but they aren't really that big inside. I think you could argue St. John's in some ways was a tougher matchup. Now, Texas Tech shoots a lot of threes and makes a lot of threes, and if you are not ready, they can start the game 7 for 9 from 3, and you could be down 24-12 without even blinking. So you got to come out ready to play. You got to come out focused. You got to be ready. But I'll tell you, you look at that matchup, I actually feel pretty good about that matchup. Now, I will say, if you get to the Elite Eight, the Florida Gators, I think will be waiting at that point, and that is going to be a monster of a matchup. Florida, I'll say it, I think they're a really tough matchup for Arkansas. But I'll tell you what, I think UConn showed that Florida is not unbeatable. So Arkansas, this unbelievable dream season continues. To me, the biggest story of Saturday was that win. Really quickly, I'll say this too. And we talked about this on Thursday's show, on Wednesday's show, on the preview shows coming in. Calipari's got Rick Pitino's number. And I said this is like, if you watch Rick Pitino's post-game press conferences after the Omaha win in round 1 and then also in round 2 or going into round 2, you could see his entire tenor change. He was the happy-go-lucky, I'm on Jimmy Fallon, I'm having the time of my life, and you could see his tenor change. You could see that Calipari had him shook. I thought it wasn't Rick Pitino's best coaching job. And again, we did an extended reaction to this game on Saturday. But, Pitino, the RJ Luis thing, not playing RJ Luis for the final 5 minutes was weird. I also thought that Zuby Ejiofor was dominating that game. Arkansas fans might disagree on the word dominating. Maybe he was just getting some calls. But Jonas Adu comes in with 4 fouls. You don't really go back to him. But wasn't Rick Pitino's best day, but part of it was John Calipari. You can see that smile right there. Look at that little guy. Look at his little smile. He's so happy. John Calipari and Arkansas get the win, the big story of Saturday. Really quickly, I guess there is one more story that we should talk about. By the way, speaking of stories, Arizona looks like they're about to clinch maybe the Big 12's 4th spot in the in the Sweet 16. And again, I can't wait to see some of these matchups. I think Arizona actually matches up pretty well with Duke, who they played earlier in the year. We'll get back to Arizona in a minute. Let's stay, though, with one of the other big results from Saturday. And how about this? The BYU Cougars. Torres is Cougar crazy, baby. That's right. We've talked about Torres being Cougar crazy, but BYU wild game. I'm talking insane game. It's crazy. I was getting ready for Fox Sports Radio, and it just felt like the entire game, they kind of had like that 8 to 10 point lead. It never really felt like it was in hand. And then all of a sudden I'm looking up and like Wisconsin has the ball with a chance to get the win. Instead, BYU gets the stop. They get the win 91-89. BYU heading to their first Sweet 16 since Jimmer Fredette was on campus in 2011. Torres is Cougar crazy, and Newark's about to be Cougar crazy this week because the BYU Cougars are now going to go to the Sweet 16 where they will face the Alabama Crimson Tide. By the way, BYU fans, if you're going to Newark, SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres. You can get $20 off your tickets. SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres. SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres. Let's get into this game. And listen, a couple things stand out about this. One, I think the big thing to me that really stands out is that the final play of the game. And why the final play of the game matters is pretty straightforward. It is because a player named Mawit Mag came up with the biggest defensive stop of the season, okay? And I think we've shared this story before, but Mawit Mag is a transfer from Rutgers. And I think I've said this story before. He played high school basketball with Jalen Green at Prolific Prep. Jalen Green, who's now with the Houston Rockets. And Mawit Mag was basically the glue guy, defensive guy, do everything guy, all the dirty work, never gets any of the credit. And that's who he's been as a college basketball player, okay? Played at Rutgers for 4 years, transfers to BYU. We spent so much time last offseason talking about Yegor Demon and Kay Bakeda and this guy and that guy and Kenneth Catchings. And Mawit Mag was the guy. Their season kind of changed when he was put into the starting lineup. He was put into the starting lineup probably about 2-3 weeks into Big 12 play. The team, I think, was 2-4 at one time in Big 12 play, and things absolutely took off. And so I'm not saying he's the only reason, but one, I think more than anything, this is why Kevin Young is in his first Sweet 16 in year one as the BYU head coach. It's because of the fact that he didn't have too much pride. One thing I love about Kevin Young, and even when he was on the show, he talked about it a little bit, is the fact that he basically said, this is all new to me. I'm learning. I love it. I love learning. I love leaning on my assistant coaches. Chris Burgess, longtime college assistant coach. Brandon Dunson, longtime college assistant coach. There's a few others. I don't want to leave anybody out. But he basically said, I'm learning in real time. And I think he came in, and I'm from the NBA, and I got all the answers. And I think that he was very willing to sit there and say, okay, what's working, what's not, what has to change. And I think a part of it was a simple change, like putting Mawit Mag in the starting lineup, completely changed everything for this team. You get the defensive guy in there. The offense doesn't miss a beat. And now we have seen what is going on with this BYU team since all these changes have been made. I go back to that first Arizona game at home. That was a game to me that they were in position to win. They could have won. They did not win, but it worked out okay because after that they play Cincinnati. Following the Cincinnati game, they go on a 9-game win streak, the one that we have talked about, the win against Kansas, the game that I was at. You beat Arizona at Arizona the following week. You sweep West Virginia. You win at Iowa State. You beat Iowa State in the conference tournament, and it isn't until you face Houston that you take your first loss. And then, oh, by the way, 2 great NCAA tournament games, including the thriller against Wisconsin over the course of the weekend. And so I give Coach Young so much credit. The other thing that stands out, one, the combination of older guys. This is why I like BYU coming into the tournament, is because 4 guys that have been part of this program, that have been part of this situation, that have had positives and negatives and good and bad and this and that, lost last year in the opener of the NCAA tournament to Duquesne. Well, those guys are all back. Well, guess who were the stars on Saturday? Richie Saunders, 25 points, 3 of 4 shooting from 3, 7 rebounds. Mr. Tater Tot himself. I'm sure you've heard the story by now. We talked about Fus Traore in the game on Thursday having a big impact. Trey Stewart is a guy that really was another guy that Kevin Young basically no disrespect, just he didn't have a role early. And now he's coming in 7 points off the bench for this team on Saturday. And so I love the growth of this team. By the way, I should mention Yegor Demon, all these freshmen playing nervous in the NCAA tournament. Yegor Demon ain't one of them, man. And I don't know if it's just because he's played in so many big games overseas, but he is a guy, Yegor Demon, that had 11 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, and 1 turnover in that win for BYU against Wisconsin. And so I just bring it up because I think this is one of the best stories in college basketball. And the other thing I'll say, if you just like good quality basketball, make sure you're in front of the TV in Newark on Thursday. Duke versus we'll get back to Duke. I forget who they're playing. But BYU versus Alabama is the 2-3 or the 2-6 game in that bracket. I am so excited for that game. By the way, it looks like Duke will play either the winner of Arizona or Oregon, so we'll see if that game goes final. It's a 2-point game with 49 seconds to go, but BYU headed to Newark. BYU fans, enjoy this moment. And I think the other thing is, and by the way, we talked about it first. Okay, so all these other media that's coming in now, oh, Kevin Young's amazing, Kevin Young's this, Kevin Young's that. Torres has been there from the beginning. Torres has been there since last April and May, when Yegor Deming committed, when Cannon Catchings committed, when Richie Saunders came back. So let's show a little love here. In all seriousness, I love the props that BYU is getting. They get the win. They advance. They are headed to Newark in the Sweet 16. First time again since 2011. I'm trying to think of what else has happened over the last couple of days. Duke rolls. We talked about them. The SEC, I think, was the story of the day on Sunday. Saturday, I think, Houston barely surviving Gonzaga was interesting. St. John's, Arkansas, we already talked about. So I'll tell you what, I know a lot of you are, first of all, it's midnight Eastern. I appreciate everybody rocking with us because we are rocking and rolling. The live chat is humming. Producer Matt, get a few questions ready. I want to wrap with one more story that I do think is worth noting here really quick. And a lot of people asked me about this on Sunday. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Coaching carousel is in full swing. Unless something weird happens, only one job in the SEC even opens, and it got filled quick. Because how about this? Shawn Miller is officially the head coach at Texas. So let's backtrack a little bit, okay? So first of all, hold on one second. I need a swig of water. Okay, so if you go back, I think the last 2.5, 3 weeks, we've talked, and by the way, let me even backtrack even more. I said Texas is maybe the only job that's going to open. We'll see. There's rumors that Buzz Williams with the senior-laden team might be trying to get out. Porter Mosier, maybe a candidate at Villanova. So let's pump the brakes on this. There's only going to be one SEC job opening, okay? But at the same time, you go back a few weeks, we started talking about Will Wade. And I said, Will Wade, I think, has the NC State job, but I think he's going to wait to see if Texas is open. So I bring it up because the expectation all spring was that Texas was eventually going to open. Listen, Rodney Terry is a great guy, but we all know the circumstances in which he got the job. Chris Beard gets fired. He's the interim head coach, and he basically needed a great NCAA tournament run for him to even keep the job in 2023. He gets it. They go to the Elite Eight. They fall one game short of going to the Final Four. They lose to Miami in the Elite Eight. And so last year they make the tournament, but this year it was kind of like, okay, we're giving you plenty of NIL money. If you can't get this program, really in pretty good position, we're just going to move on. And so we knew Rodney Terry was going to move on. When Will Wade officially accepted the NC State job, I had a pretty good idea that Texas, if they were going to fire Rodney Terry, certainly had the next candidate in mind. It was Shawn Miller. I think it was always Shawn Miller. By the way, I think that's part of the reason why Will Wade made it official with NC State. He knew he wasn't very high up on the Texas pecking order. And so Shawn Miller is officially the Texas head coach. And so to me, let me just say this. Let me not beat around the bush. Let me get right to the point. I think Shawn Miller is going to murder in the SEC, okay? And I think he's going to murder specifically at Texas, okay? And listen, he's got a very interesting career arc. I think everybody kind of knows the background. He was at Arizona for a long time, caught up in the FBI stuff. I think one of the reasons that Shawn likes me is because I kind of defended him. If you go back and look at some of the FBI stuff, it was kind of nonsense. He was accused of some stuff that had nothing to do with him, and it was later bared out that way. But if you look at what he did at Arizona, this guy went to 3 Elite Eights and 5 Sweet 16s in his time at Arizona from 2009, 2010 to 2021. I think the crazy part about it was, one, he was an elite recruiter. Two, what I thought was so interesting, this is the kind of guy that Shawn Miller is that even when the FBI stuff was going on, he brings in a recruiting class that features Nico Mannion and Josh Green, 2 McDonald's All-Americans. Then the following year, American kids are afraid to commit to him because they don't know what's going on with the NCAA. He goes out, completely flips his recruiting philosophy in one offseason, gets Kirk Kriisa, gets Azuolas Tubelis, puts together this monster international class. And the one thing I'll tell you about Shawn Miller, one, the guy is a winner, okay? This is a guy, like I said, four Elite Eights total in his career. One at Xavier many years ago, and then 3 at Arizona. In the Arizona reign, 2 of the Arizona Elite Eight appearances came down to the final play of the game. 2011 against UConn, 2014 against Wisconsin in a game that I was at. And I bring it up because everyone's going to say, oh, he's never made a Final Four. He's made 4 Elite Eights and like 7 or 8 Sweet 16s. The guy knows how to coach. And the one thing I'll say, not only is he a great coach, I think he is I know for a fact he's a great recruiter. I'll tell you a quick side story. I live on the West Coast, okay? And when he had it rolling at Arizona, I live in LA. And so I'm around not only Arizona, but I'm around UCLA and USC a lot. And the one thing that everybody told me is that when he had it rolling at the highest level at Arizona, you know what they used to say to me about Shawn Miller? They used to say that Shawn Miller is a head coach who recruits like an assistant. In other words, he's making all the extra phone calls. He's making all the extra contacts. He's touching base with mom. He's touching base with grandma. He's making sure blah, 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 this and that. And this was all in the pre-NIL era. Now, as far as Xavier's concerned, I think it's kind of worth noting. He goes to Xavier, has them in the Sweet 16 in year 1. Last year deals with 1 million injuries, and then gets them back to the NCAA tournament this year, where, of course, he knocks off Texas in the first 4 before losing on Friday night to Illinois. And so I know the Xavier run wasn't incredible, but here's the other reality. I just think Xavier was working with some resources that weren't very good compared to the rest of college basketball. And I do think this is kind of a sad byproduct of the NIL era, is I think the top of the sport, the cream, is going to continue to rise. We talked about 7 SEC teams in the Sweet 16. Well, guess what? The entire Sweet 16 is SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC teams. There are no mid-majors. There are no Mountain West. There are no A10. There are no completely off. And it's just because the sport is starting to separate itself. And so with Shawn, I think that he saw the writing on the wall at Xavier. It's crazy, by the way, how quickly a couple years can change things. When he took the Xavier job, this is a fact. He had an offer from South Carolina. And I think he felt like, I can win at Xavier more than I can win at South Carolina in that crazy SEC. But now we see it's all about NIL, and with the way the net is set up, there's no downside to being the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th best team in the SEC. You're going to make the tournament anyway. And so you take a guy that's an elite game day coach. You take a guy that is an elite recruiter, and you put him at a job that I believe, we've been saying it for probably 20 years in college basketball. Texas is a sleeping giant. They just need somebody to wake them up. I remember when Chris Beard took the job, I kept saying, Chris Beard views Texas as a blue blood. It might not be a blue blood. It's not North Carolina. It's not Kentucky. It's not Kansas. But he's like, wait a second now. With all the money we got, with all the recruits in the state of Texas, I can win national championships here. And so we talked about it when Chris Beard had the job, and I think it's the same with Shawn Miller. I think, look, if this was the old days, I think he would have been happy staying at Xavier. But this is an NIL world. I don't think they can compete at the highest level. They lost, by the way, last year, their best player, Desmond Claude, entered the portal and ended up at USC. And I just think he realized, I can't win. I'm not going to have the resources to win at the highest levels at Xavier the way I'll be able to at Texas. So now, elite game day coach, elite recruiter, and he's going to Texas with the NIL that they have. Yeah, that's going to be a freaking problem, okay? And I think the one thing about Shawn Miller, he is going to have a game plan where Rodney Terry just felt like, we have this money, let's spend it on whoever. And then you watch the team, and it's like Jordan Poe, no disrespect, but like some of these guys don't fit. They play the same position. How does this work? How does that work? He's going to put together a game plan. But more than that, I just think he's going to have so many resources. Like I was telling somebody, like Shawn Miller at Texas, like they might mess up the whole NIL market for this offseason. Like if you think you had your budget all set, well, now Texas with the new head coach and aggressive recruiter in Shawn Miller, they might screw up the NIL market for everybody, okay? So Shawn Miller gets the goes from Xavier to Texas. I think he's going to be a beast there. Now, again, I said it to lead the show. I don't think John Calipari's shaking in his boots. I don't think Mark Pope and Rick Barnes and Bruce Pearl and Nate Oates, they see great coaches every single time they walk the sidelines. But Texas was the one. It's like if they get the right guy, that team is going to be a freaking problem. And I think they will be with Shawn Miller as their head coach. We're at an hour 15 here on the Aaron Torres pod. It looks like the Arizona-Oregon game is still going at 12:10 Eastern time. Producer Matt, let's get a question or two before we get out of here. Let's see here. Update Survivor. Dan Rivera is all over this Survivor thing. So our Survivor pool, 51 out of 94 have survived. 26 people had Maryland, 10 people had Michigan State, 5 Iowa State. So 5 people were eliminated. I'll be real. I technically have 2 because of just the way the Survivor pool worked out. I did have Maryland in 1. Derek Queen, my brother. Thank you, man. Torres is still alive in the Survivor pool. It'll be really interesting because so many top teams advanced. And I think most people understand in Survivor, you got to save those really good teams for later in the tournament. So I'll be curious because I think there's 51 people still left. There's only 4 more rounds. I guess there's 7 days left of total games between the 4 games this weekend, 4 days this weekend, 3 games next weekend. Could we have more than one winner? I don't know. We'll see. But there's a lot of good teams still in, and there's a lot of people that are going to have those good teams. So thank you, Dan, for the update. 51 people still in. I think 1 or 2 people had Arizona. A couple people had Oregon. So I think either way, another person or 2 will be knocked out depending on how this game goes. But we are, by the way, still somehow on air. It's 12 Eastern time and 12:11 Eastern time, and Oregon and Arizona are still playing. All right. Producer Matt, any other questions before we get out of here? Chuck says, why would they open the portal before the season ends? Tournament ends. Well, first of all, Chuck, remember, they pushed it back a week. It was technically opening the day after Selection Sunday, and I think a lot of coaches in the tournament got mad about it. I think this is a good middle ground, and let me explain why. There's only 16 teams left after the tournament. Do you wish you could wait until after the tournament? Of course you do. But these players that their seasons are done, they're not going to wait, and the coaches recruiting them aren't going to wait. And so it just becomes a thing of, if John Smith from UConn wants to enter the portal and his season is over, you're going to make him wait until April 12th to actually do it, even though he already knows who's recruiting him and where he's going to go. It's not a perfect system, but it looks like, it is what it is. It's the best that we can do. Someday we'll have collective bargaining and regulation. And if that's the case, then, things will change. Really quickly, what is going on with this Oregon-Arizona game? So Arizona's up 2 with 5 seconds left. I can't talk about it. All right. Producer Matt, any other good questions? I might just go watch the last 10 seconds of this game. Who are the top 3 shooters in college basketball? I don't know, man. Kobe Bryant is pretty good. I don't know. It's a tough. There's a lot of good shooters. Not the question for 12-14 on a Sunday night here. Is that it, Producer Matt? Oh yeah, Walter Clayton might be number 1, 2, and 3. All right, I'll tell you what. Is this Arizona game over? What are we doing here? We're in foul shot land. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here and maybe watch the last couple seconds of this game. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres pod, do me a favor. Make sure to do so. Man, I wish, we got a great live crowd. I should probably keep this part. Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music. Can you hear me? Producer Matt says my mic's out. My mic out? Okay, we're back. Good to be back. All right, I'm going to get out of here. If you're not subscribed, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, review. Thank you, SeatGeek. Use SeatGeek.com, promo code Torres. Also, BetUS TV. Also, we'll be back Monday night talking portal. Get ready. Tomorrow's going to be an adventure, and I'm not talking about these games. Shout out to Torrin Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me. We'll be back Monday talking portal. Tuesday,